Good morning and welcome to Mental Health Matters Office Hours. It's a show where we take a deep dive into all things workplace wellbeing. I'm Dr Audrey Tang, my co-host is Judith Crosier, and today we are joined by a very special guest. It is Dr Poppy Jarman, and she is the founder, or one of the founders of Mental Health First Aid England. She is going to be talking to us about her career, but also about the community work that is absolutely speaking to her passions. Let's head over to the studio. Welcome to Mental Health Matters Office Hours, Poppy. It's so exciting to speak with you.
I'm really excited to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, we all know, first of all, about mental health first aid, and we're going to start there. Yeah. Because mental health first aid, it makes a huge difference to know that there are people in the workplace who have at least a working understanding of some of the mental health issues that we might be facing. So we know that you are one of the founders of Mental Health First Aid England. Please tell us a little bit about your professional journey and where that mental health work came in.
Yeah, of course, Judith. I mean, I'm really proud of Mental Health First Aid. It's I'd definitely say it's my career highlight so far. Mental Health First Aid started back in Department of Health, and not a lot of people know the history of Mental Health First Aid. So England was the third country to develop mental health first aid. So the founder is in Australia, Betty Kitchener, and then Scotland did a massive piece of public health research which discovered that there was a really high rate of male suicide at the time, and this is going back almost 20 years. So, and then Scotland learned about this thing called mental health first aid that was being rolled out in Australia. So the Department of Health there the public health teams there decided to try it out. And then we in England, and I was working at the Department of Health at the time, discovered that Scotland were rolling out this thing called mental health first aid, and it was actually beginning to have a real impact in getting the general population to talk about mental health. And remember, before this time, mental health was very, very clinical. It was always about, the medical profession are the only people that can actually support anybody with mental illness. And there was no real understanding of the recovery model. So the idea we all believed in was that if you got a diagnosis of mental illness, whether it's common depression or psychosis, that you would never fully recover, that life wouldn't be fulfilled. So that stigma was huge. And so mental health first aid, the journey that we went on was, how do we educate the general public to develop a shared and a common understanding that actually, even with a diagnosis of mental illness as severe as psychosis, you can still have quality of life. And that wasn't making sense in people's lives. And Audrey, and you know all about this. So you can have depression, anxiety, just like you can have diabetes or a long-term health condition. I've got systemic lupus, but I have a very full life because I manage it, and you have to get to understand that yourself with that condition. So so that was sort of the foundations of why Mental Health First Aid started, and here we are almost 20 years later in the UK and worldwide. I think there's more than 36 countries that are rolling it out. England, I'm very chuffed that I led it as the CEO, and when I left, we were the fastest growing SME in the top 50 in the country and the top 500 in Europe. So I took it out of DH and set it up as a social enterprise.
I mean, may I take this opportunity to thank you on behalf of so many organisations who are all using it, and it has really improved those conversations. So kind of you mentioned a little bit about that stigma and how mental ill health was always very clinical. What were some of the, issues or problems in the dialogue that people were having that you've been able to kind of shift through this social enterprise of Mental Health First Aid?
Yeah, and look, we were one of a number of organisations. I think we had an amazing period, almost a decade, where all the mental health charities in the UK and to a certain extent globally collaborated, and we came together and we were like, so Mind, Rethink, Time to Change, Mental Health First Aid, Mental Health Foundation, Samaritans, all of us CEOs were collaborating for about a decade to actually really shift the dial on how the general public understood mental health. And we had the Royals campaign, Heads Together campaign. So the UK made a concerted effort as a nation, as the nations in the UK, to actually lean in on this mental health agenda and educate the general public. And that, I think, the media campaign that sat alongside this was important. And like I said, it was probably over a decade, and Mental Health First Aid definitely played a very big role in that, because we were the training program that corporates rolled out, that there isn't anywhere that I don't go now that some people haven't heard of Mental Health First Aid. And Audrey, the bit that I usually love is when people are trying to sell me Mental Health First Aid. That's always quite good fun. I mean, I'm in a meeting, or and the people are like, "Oh, I do this training, and it's called Mental Health First Aid, and maybe you'll be interested in it for your team." And I'm like, "Oh, tell me why it's so good." And I often don't tell people that, my role in it. But I think when you look at the course, and those of you that have experienced the course is just a really highly tuned communications tool.
Yes.
It's not, you could change the content to anything. You could change, we obviously have a module on suicide, and that was probably the most delicate one, the one that we had to be most sensitive about. But actually, you could change the content, subject matter to anything. What we're saying is there's two sides to this. First of all, you need to recognize early warning signs, and early warning signs are the ones that we obviously all assume: irritability, mood swings, low moods, high moods, irrational thinking, distorted thinking. But actually, they're also sleep, too much sleep, too little sleep. There are inability to hold conversations, our inability to remember, and a lot of brain fog. For me, there's elbow ache and jaw ache and headaches. So there's physical manifestations and things that we just sort of write off as, that's just me having a bad day. But when you put it all together, and when you've experienced those symptoms, shall we call it, or have those experience for 6 to 8 weeks, you are going into a diagnosable condition like depression. And what we're saying in Mental Health First Aid is catch yourself early and catch each other early, so that when you are noticing that you're losing sleep and you're not able to concentrate at work and you're not able to remember things and you're feeling like you've got a voice in your internal dialogue is very negative about who you are and if those things aren't your normal, then notice them, acknowledge them, and then do something about that. And I guess and the Mental Health First Aid course is notice them in people around you. And instead of having in the workplace, for example, a conversation that is performance, your performance is not working, actually have a conversation that goes something like, I've noticed that your working patterns have changed, that you're looking tired, or you're not coming out for socials after work, or whatever it is that the change is. You've made several mistakes on the same project, even though you've had feedback. What's going on for you?
Yes.
That's where the starting point, rather than something else. And that's a compassionate dialogue that Mental Health First Aid teaches as a structure, really. There's nothing more scientific about it, but that's the point. It's not scientific. It's normalizing.
Oh, yes, yeah. It's what's going on for you. So important.
Well, yes, it changes it from being judgmental to caring, doesn't it? So
totally.
Really important.
It's that compassion, Jude, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. So since organisations have been taking mental health more seriously, what changes have you noticed in organisations?
Yeah, so Jude, I left Mental Health First Aid, I think I'm 6 years now. So Mental Health First Aid got to a point where I was just so happy with it. It was financially really secure. We'd rolled it out in all over the country, and we'd also help other countries like Bangladesh, India, Uganda set it up. And I just got to a point where I was like, my job here is done. And then I set up another organization called Mind Forward Alliance. And the reason why that came about, part of the reason why that came about, is you can train as many people as you like. And these days, there are some really great courses. It's not just mental health first aid. Organizations have developed their own courses that are fine-tuned to their people or their community. So, you know, I think that, and that's right, that's the way it should be evolved. But one of the things that what I noticed, Jude, was that you could have as many trainers as you train people as you like, but if there wasn't a systemic recognition within an organization, like the board doesn't recognize it, your line manager doesn't really understand it, why you're doing this fluffy thing over there, this is a job and we should all be performing, and you don't have an employee assistance program that is robust enough to understand mental health and actually nuanced mental health from different cultural identities or women in our different health cycles at different points in life. You know, if you don't have structures and system around it, you've got great people trained like mental health first aiders. I'm having a conversation with you, but I've got nowhere to signpost you to. That's the simple thing, but also on a bigger picture, if you're in, whether it's the finance sector and you're making big decisions on big, like in money, or you're a doctor or a clinician or an engineer and you're making decisions that are going to be safety related, and actually your mental health isn't great, we all make mistakes. That's just human nature, but we make more mistakes when we're tired and we're not feeling 100%. That's an organizational risk factor. So how do we make organizations a culture or create a culture of flourishing, but also it's not just because it's a nice thing to do, it's health and safety, it's productivity related. And I think that's where we're at now in terms of the change that we're seeing. So mature organizations, and Mind Forward helps big companies develop their mental health strategy. So that's what I shifted from training to actually going, okay, how do we help large businesses around the world that are, HSBC is a good example, 66 countries, 60,000 employees. How do you get these large systems, large institutions to create a people strategy that is going to be wellness orientated, and that's the thing that big organizations are now doing, is that those organizations that understand that this is a productivity issue, it's a health and safety issue, so it's a business critical issue, it's not an HR issue, because HR is for the business, people strategies for the employees. So they're the ones that is really exciting times, actually, because you see them. Some companies have got it on their risk register, so it's monitored at board level. They've got line manager training being rolled out systematically across the whole organization with nuances in different countries. They've reviewed their employee assistant programs and understood that in multi-generational household where you've got different, like in Asian cultures, for example, where you've got, you know, multi-generations all living under the same household, you need to extend the EAP program to other people living in the house so that other people can access mental health services. So there's some really great things going on that are on the systemic change level that I am enjoying seeing.
That's huge, and those differences are absolutely huge. We're keeping you with us, Poppy, and we'll be back just after this break. Welcome back to Mental Health Matters Office Hours. It's so interesting talking to you, Poppy. Your career has not only benefited so many people and organisations, but your passion for really making hands-on improvements in mental health is so inspirational and a really incredible role modelling of what needs to be done. And that kind of brings me to this next area where you are working within the community. And I love this this is something that I'm very passionate about myself. You are creating pathways to empowerment, to connectivity, to taking up your space again as people within the community who sometimes may just forget, not necessarily having a mental health issue or anything like that, but we just may forget that we are individual people that are allowed to be seen. And you have a brilliant community campaign called Saree Now Sorry. And this is fabulous. You're in a beautiful sari at the moment. Please tell us a little bit more about this.
I would love to tell you about this. This is the thing that brings me joy. So look, I'm when you go back to my roots I'm a community development worker by background. So, and you know, when people ask me what do you do, that's the job title I'm the most proud of. I'm a community development worker, and I started my career in my I think it was like probably 19 or 20, where I had sessional work and I was working with women's groups and usually ferrying Auntie G's around from picking them up and then taking them to play bingo, and then we'd make samosas and we'd all eat together, and then we'd have some more games. And that was how I started my career, because I was a mum quite early on, and sessional work fitted around my life. But even in those days, I'd often, when we had community events, I'd often sort of, you know, love learning from the elders, you know, the different ways of draping saris. And I'd quite often, when there was a fair, turn up with a bunch of saris, and everybody always loved, regardless of your gender, your ethnicity. Give people a bit of material and colour and leave them alone for a minute, and permission to play. And it's just that's what we do. And actually, as an adult, that's one of the things that goes, doesn't it? Because we then become busy working and parenting and all of that. So look, I mean, I'm just gonna show you. Look.
Wow.
This is it. This is my loft room, and it's got a collection of saris, which are probably, I think there's about 400 saris in this room.
Wow, goodness. Beautiful colours.
Absolutely stunning.
And I love working up here because it just, there's just colours everywhere, and it just means that when I am doing the mental health work, I'm surrounded by art and creativity. And so that we could get into the whole history of so I'm wearing a more cotton sari, which is made by a brand called Sutta, which is Indian brand, and there's two women that started it, and all of their saris are natural materials, natural dyes, and they're really soft. And because it's so hot today, this is like the perfect sari for me. It feels like a hug. I'm thinking about, I live in Brighton, so thinking about going to the beach later, and I'll probably just take a bikini with me, and then it will become a sarong. So there's,
love it.
And saris are one long unstitched piece of cloth, and they range from 5.5 meters, 4 meters, right the way till about 9 meters. Each sari has its own design depending on which region it comes from. But there's also these days mass production of saris, which is the thing that fast fashion has had an impact in every industry, and I'm the most against of that. So I think buy pre-loved saris, because there's loads out there, and also if you're going to buy new, buy handloom to promote the artisans who are, it's a dying trade. Some of these saris and the way that you weave them is actually diminishing with fast fashion taking over in the way that it has. So that's my plug for that. But coming back to the sari itself, what I love about it is the fact that it's one long unstitched piece of cloth, which means that it is the most inclusive garment in the world, and you just need to learn to knot, pleat and tuck. And once you've got those three skills, you can wear the sari however you want. And there's a recorded around about 200 ways to drape a sari, and that's more than the sari itself. The draping, Jude, is what I'm interested in, because if you're from a fishing community, you would have worn the sari in like a mini skirt style or short style. And what was quite interesting, I think it was in the I don't know which year exactly, but I think it was around about the 60s, where the French fashion industry picked this up, and they made a big deal about the sari being like draped in a mini skirt, and it became fashionable. And yet actually where the roots of it were back in somewhere in the Asian subcontinent. So you can people wore the sari or the unstitched cloth regardless of gender. So and you can wear it in so many different ways that actually for me it's a way of expressing yourself. So what I do in my Saree Nasori fun shops is teach people 2 or 3 ways to drape, which is always really funny because it is just funny when you get a group of people and material, and sometimes people have come like wrapped themselves up like a loo roll and can't move, and and it's really but the idea is the opposite of depression is expression. And it's not happiness, it's expression. When we lose our ability to express, whether it's verbally, whether it's physically, and if you think about it, most of us have had low days, even if you haven't had clinical depression. What is it that you do? Like, quite common symptoms are that we just hide away, and we'll wear the most boring, our hoodies and our job suits will come out. And that's great, because on some days that's all you need. You want to hide out. But we don't want to express ourselves. We lose our ability to be like bold and who we are, and all of that goes. So for me, Saree Nasori is about unapologetically expressing yourself. And I guess
Fantastic.
Yes.
yeah. And so for about in a 3-hour fun shop, and I've called it fun shop on purpose, we explore what you would look like if you were expressing yourself in a sari, and I've had some really powerful anecdotes that I've got permission to share. So one lady who's now a good friend, I met her a first time she came to one of my early fun shops, and I was quite nervous back then still, because I was promoting it as it's all inclusive, everybody's welcome, da da da. And Vic uses a power chair. And I didn't think about that. So she registered, and on the pre-form she put that she uses a power chair. So I phoned her, and we had a really nice chat, and I said to her, look, I've never draped anybody in a power chair. Can I lift you out? And she was like, no, I'm fixed to this chair. I have to be strapped in. I was like, okay, well, come early. Anyway, so it took, so I put the sari on her, and then what we do is I don't have a mirror initially, because what we talk about is how does it feel? How are you feeling in this moment? What does it look? How are you walking? And how are you moving? In Vic's case, and then I get the mirror, and we do what we call the reveal, and people take a moment to look at themselves. And Vic, there's a beautiful picture of Vic just catching her reflection, and she said, "Well, I've been stared at all my life, and today I want to be seen. I look stunning." And everybody cried. All of us were like,
that's
God.
beautiful.
And then I went, and when you speak to Vic, of course it makes sense. She's her body is, I think she's two and a half. So I'm 5 foot. So I think she's 3.5 foot. Anyway, so she's shorter than me, and she's obviously disabled, and she's has to wear clothes that are adapted, children's clothes. And so this idea that we have to fit into clothes, whether it's our trousers, our jeans, our power suits, and yet what the sari does is it fits around you. And I think that is quite an amazing metaphor for life. Actually, what would we do if things fitted around us rather than us fitting into spaces that quite often people feel like they don't belong in? And that's where sort of the whole concept of belonging comes in as well. So we have some amazing stories. I've had a trans woman come and said that she felt like she'd been wrapped up in love, and she had been accused of appropriating a gender all her life, and she was worried about appropriating a culture, but actually what she learned was drapery was about love and a big hug. And so I had a gentleman come who was in his 70s, and it triggered a memory of when he went to India with his wife, and he was a white English gentleman. And and he just remembered how his father-in-law put a dhoti on him, which was like a trouser drape, and went round the village and introduced him to everybody. And so in his 70s, he had a real memory of going back to that space. So I love it because it gives me the opportunity to share my love of saris and also use these saris that are in this, like, what am I going to do with this collection? So that's lovely. But I also really, it's about going back to my community development roots, where I'm sitting in a room with 5 or 6 people and we spend 3 or 4 hours messing about, but also talking about things that have had a big impact on our lives. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I know, Jude, you've got a question about just bringing out that cultural appropriation question or concern. But just before that, how does this connect you with your own heritage as well? Because there's some lovely stories of how people have brought back those memories. But how do you feel the space allows you to reconnect?
In a massive way, Audrey. So if you look at my career and and also my personal world, so I'm in a mixed heritage relationship. My main language is, as a child I grew up as my first language being Bengali, but for the last 40 years my first language has been English. So when I'm back with family, I often have to find the rhythm again of how to speak Bengali and fluidly, and I often seem to mix up words as well these days. So I feel like as I'm getting older and assimilating more with my first culture, I'm a British woman, I'm a brown woman, but I'm a British woman. There's a lot that's not that I'm missing. So the Saree does several things for me. Is that it's an invitation to myself to actually stay connected and also pass on a part of my cultural identity that is being a part of me through and through, and the women particularly in my life. I think it's a way of honoring the women in my life, passing on the art of drapery, but also connecting back to myself. So whenever there's a key work event, whether it's at the Bank of England or at NASDAQ in New York, I've turned up in a very cool saree to do the keynote speech on stage. And sometimes that's a little bit unnerving, because you're like, oh, as soon as I'm already brown woman, so I'm already got in my assumption, and it's not always true, is that people have already got a stereotype of a little Asian woman in their heads. And now I'm going to show up in a sari and really dial that up. And actually what I want to talk about is mental health strategy, performance, health and safety. So I'm not here to talk about diversity, but I've replaced my power suit with a sari, and I don't know how that's going to land. So there have been times, I was speaking at a very, very big French law firm a while back, and I was chairing this meeting, and in the morning I just thought, I can't wear a sari today. I'm going to put my red dress on.
Oh, wow.
So there, it is quite interesting observing myself and seeing which part of me Jude is going to show up, because as women, I think, one of my Nasari fun shops, somebody said, I stopped looking at, she was a woman in her 30s, and she said, oh, I stopped looking at my reflection in my teens, and when I think about it now, I stopped looking at my reflection when I realized that when I recognized the male gaze on me. And so I mean, we could unpack that for hours, but I think it's quite women's bodies are observed in a very highly tuned way. And whether it's Afghanistan and you're not even allowed to speak in public, or whether it's, walking down the road in this country and people looking at you and with wolf whistling or whatever it might be, like, women's bodies are observed in so many different ways. So it is quite interesting when I choose how I choose to show up and what I'm worried about that it might trigger. As I'm getting older, so much more confidence. I'm like, whatever. Whatever.
Wear what you want to wear.
Yeah, I am loving this phase of life and confidence. But I can do that now, right? Because I'm not worried about losing a job, and of course, you know, I still have a mortgage, but I'm not at the early career. I've got less to lose, I think. My kids have left home. They've all, touch wood, got work, and so I think confidence comes with privilege.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we do have to go to a break, but I think we've got time for just that one more question.
Yeah, so you touched on cultural appropriation before, and it's something that I would worry about. So how would I address these concerns? Because, you know, saris are beautiful, and wearing a sari would be something that I would love to learn how to do.
So we have so many different angles to this discussion. So first of all, I would ask you what's inappropriate, and maybe reflect on what it is that why you think it's inappropriate. For me, appropriation is, it's inappropriate when you're taking something from somebody else's culture, pretending it's your own, and even more worse when you're making money from that. So when you've got celebrities and artists and big fashion houses taking a weave or a particular drape and not acknowledging the source, and making a load of money and not giving it back. So I guess capitalism is where I sit with this. But for me, there's a few things I'd say to you, Judith. One is, first of all, the invitation is coming from a British Bangladeshi woman who's saying to you, I'm inviting you to come and play with the sari and learn the art of drapery, and quite often that is enough for people to go, okay, well, the invitation came from somebody who's trying to teach me the art of something. And then the other things that I would say is, you know, if we all get caught up in this narrative of appropriation and therefore don't connect with each other's culture, don't eat each other's food, don't try on each other's clothes, don't celebrate each other's festivals, we're going to become even more divided and polarized in society. So for me, you know, your curiosity to learn to drape, that's just an art form, right? That's just like, it's like my curiosity to paint and make marks. That's just an art form. So I think there's lots of ways of describing what the curiosity is, and I think being authentic to yourself. If you then went off and set up sari not sorry instead of sari na sorry and started to go, well, that would be appropriation.
Of course.
And inappropriate.
Yes.
Yeah, it's giving it the respect, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, now we're keeping you, Poppy, and we'll be back just after this. Welcome back to Mental Health Matters Office Hours. We are having a fabulous discussion with Poppy, and we're talking about the Saree Na Sorry fun shop that you are running, which really connects people with not just community roots, but heritage and empowerment, and a really practical, hands-on way to think about empowerment and taking up space. Now, just to pull at the heritage thread a little bit, why is it so important, especially for either British-born or people living in the UK now, to reconnect with their heritage? Because it's something I know I'm guilty of not doing, because my parents came here and it was all about being as British as possible. And it's only now where I'm kind of going, hang on a minute, I wish I'd asked a few more questions, I wish I connected a bit better, and I'm making the steps to do that. Why is that so important?
I'm loving the little bit of journey I heard about the steps that you're taking. I'm like, I want to be on that trip with you, but maybe you do it first, and then you can take a group of us to go. And I would love that. And I'll bring my saris, and we can all dress up.
Definitely. Well, this is the thing, because it's a pilot. Just to put our viewers in the picture, I'm doing a documentary on the Peranakan heritage, which is known as Babanonia. You won't have heard of it because we don't talk about it, and it practically doesn't exist. So that's why I'm going to go back to study it, and coming soon to E360 TV. But anyway, let's go back to...
That was a really good little trail. I'm so excited about your journey. So look, there's when you look at anthropology, so when you look at the anthropology of migrant communities, there's research that shows that the people like from my community, the Bangladeshi community, like my granddad's generation came over. Well, granddad came over because he was recruited as part of East India Company to work on the docks and on the boats. So when they were bringing the spices and the cottons and all of that over from Asia, granddad was one of the people that was working on the boats.
Oh, wow.
And so that was first generation. So they were economic migrants. They were employed by the company, East India Company, to do the work. Then dad came over and joined granddad when he was about 12 years old. And again, still working really hard to make ends meet, send money back home. He was here to doing a job. Then us lot turn up. So either my younger brothers were born here, I was born in Bangladesh, but we're, I guess, second, third generation, depending on how you want to look at it, because granddad never. Yeah. So anyway, so we're then the kids of the generation that just worked, like their job. They lived with a metaphorical suitcase. And sometimes a real suitcase on top of the cupboard. I remember our suitcases always being on top of the cupboard, because any time now we were going to go. Of course, that time never came, because kids turned up, you go to school, then the kids are getting married, da 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 da. Yeah. So, and I don't think my parents were particularly prepared for that. And, you know, the intention was that at some point we would always go back home. And actually that was really unlikely. And then there were other parents of my friends who were the same generation, like yours a little bit, Audrey, who were like, right, we're gonna, everything, you need to be as more British than British.
Yes.
So
Yes.
we need to lose your accent, you need to dress English, we're gonna send you to private school, you're gonna be, you know, so you had sort of that bit. And then what the anthropologically what you see then is then our kids. So we were sort of that middle generation. I've certainly owned that, is that I felt really discombobulated, like I didn't really know what my identity was. When at home I was being trained to be a Bangladeshi wife, you know, and a good daughter-in-law and a good mother. And then at school, like my teachers were giving me aspirations around being you know, having a career and being a dancer, and you know, and so it was really discombobulating. I didn't really feel like I knew what my identity was. And so our generation have then raised the next generation, my kids' generation, who with a lot of freedom and hopefully a lot of privilege and a lot of choice and good opportunities, by giving them a lot of what we didn't have. And it's that generation that are then going, actually, we've got space to explore who we really are. Yes. So this trend that we're seeing about the next generation really going, who are we and what is our ethnicity and what does Bangladeshi food look like and what does Bangladeshi, like, what are the customs and culture? There's a lot of curiosity, mainly because they've got space.
Yeah.
Not everybody, but mostly they've got space to be able to do that, because they're not working 3 jobs to send money back home. So I think there's a movement and a shift that's happened with sort of social mobility has happened, that's created that space. So that would be my response in terms of, we are seeing a trend, and this is where it's landing. And then connecting that back to sort of the Saree work, I was quite surprised. So when I started this thing a couple of years ago, I only do like 1 a month, and it's not a money making thing. It's just pure joy. It's like fun thing. And I totally expected sort of my white friends and their friends to come along and try Saree. What I didn't expect was that 3rd generation, 4th generation of Asian women coming. But there was always a group or 2 or 3 people from that sort of demographic that show up. And then their stories are really interesting to me. So, you know, quite like there was one person who was like, well, I don't speak my mother tongue, and I feel very, very British. You know, I don't own any saris. I don't go to Indian parties. I don't listen to Asian music. There is nothing about the way that I live beyond my brown skin and black hair that is, but I and part of that is that my mum experienced domestic violence, so we turned our back on the whole community. But now I feel like I need an invitation back to myself. And so that's why I'm here. And I was like, God, this is only a Saree fun shop. Like but it's really interesting because of the conversations. And I guess maybe because of my mental health background, like I guess I'm able to hold conversations that go a bit deeper than, let's put a Saree on. And so and there was another lady, a young woman who was like, my grandmother's given me all of these saris. I've never seen my mum wear a sari. She's married to a German guy. My dad's German, and I really want to learn, but my mum doesn't know how to. So I've turned up here, and she came from quite far away actually to she took a couple of hours journey to come here, and she was like, my mum's gone to the cinema, and I'm here to do the fun shop.
Oh, wow.
and so I think I'm really enjoying that. So I think what I'm doing at the moment, Audrey, is just experimenting with. I just have them as open source things, but I think in time I'll probably, when I've got more time, like fine tune them to this. This is for young Asian women, from this demographic, and this is for trans women or trans people. I don't like. I'm learning. I'm just sort of letting this thing unfold and seeing if I can nuance some of the fun shops so that it creates space for people with a specific subject in mind to come and explore that part of their identity. Because it is beautiful when something shifts in people, and it's great to be in a room when someone says, oh, I feel like I've got the invitation back to myself, or this is the first time I'm describing myself as stunning. Like those things are just... And I also think, sorry, I'll just add one more thing to this, is that talking therapy, I love it. I've been to loads of talking therapy. It's common knowledge that I speak about my own mental health lived experience throughout my career. And I think psychotherapy is great. I think coaching is great. But I also think that it's not for everyone.
Yeah.
And this westernized assumption that we'll all sit in a room and share our deepest, darkest faults and fears with somebody that we don't know it is not true for everybody. And we can do a lot of healing through art, and I genuinely think that there's the evidence base around that is growing enormously. But I'm also not wedded to the idea that everything needs to be evidence-based, because gathering evidence is also a westernized male model. So I think art and spending time doing things with our hands and listen, music and play actually can heal in quite deep, profound ways that doesn't require talking. And I guess this is something that I'm learning firsthand. How if you hold a safe space and create the right environment, people observe each other and do things and learn things that actually makes big, powerful shifts inside them.
Yeah. It's important to remember that, isn't it?
Very much.
Other ways. So going back to heritage, do you have any top tips for encouraging people to learn about their heritage?
Yeah, totally. So I think that there's sort of three things that are obvious part of any culture: food, clothes, and language. and they're three sort of core elements, but there's so much that sits around that. And I think that if anybody was seeking out a part of themselves or their history or their ancestry, those are the three angles to look at. Because just simple things like in English there's X number of words for emotions, so feelings, but then you look at Urdu or Hindi or Bengali and there's like 25 different ways to describe one feeling.
Wow.
And so I think that just that is in it. You don't have to know all the language, but understanding that there's so many different ways to describe the same thing just from a language lens expands us, I think, gives us more. But also the precision of English. I'm not saying one's more than the other. You know, my first language is English, and I speak a bit of Bengali and a bit of Hindi. But I think it's just really fascinating to understand that there is so much more than what's in front of us, and it makes us feel more connected. So I would say those would be the three starting points. Go and learn. And there are some cultures and communities where some of the food is really bad, but that too is a story,
Yes,
right?
yes,
That
true,
too
true.
that too is a story. So I think it's that, and I think it gives you, when we're feeling lonely, and which is often one of the symptoms of depression, or the causation, both, you know, when we're feeling lonely, there's nothing more powerful than feeling like you've got a deep history, and you're connected to so much more than your four walls, because you've spent a whole week in front of your computer just speaking to a screen. You know, it's about creating connection to more than our immediate environment.
Yeah, great places to start as well. Thank you ever so much. It's so fascinating listening to you. Thank you. Where can we find out more about you?
So Saree Nasori is spelled Sareena. So na means no in Bengali, and sorry is obviously sorry. And even the name, my daughter's helped come up with it, but it was like an expression of my dual heritage, my multiple identity. So
Love it.
so we've got an Instagram page, we've got Rebalance is the website, and Rebalance is my organization that's outside of Mind Forward work, where I do community stuff, and we do lots of different things on there. But Saree Nasori is one of those projects that's the one that we're giving the most energy to at the moment. So yeah, the website or Instagram are the two places where we can find out more about Saree Nasori. And then the mental health work, if there's any corporates listening and want to think about their mental health strategy as an organization, go to Mind Forward Alliance, and we've got a whole load of free resources on how to create. We've got something called Thriving at Work Framework, and that's one of our most downloaded documents, where it gives you the principles of creating a whole organization strategy for mental health. So when you're ready to go on to a 3-year journey rather than a quick fixes, that's a document that I highly recommend.
Oh, my goodness.
Brilliant.
Thank you for all the work that you do, Poppy. It's just, you're such an inspirational and such a wonderful role model as well. Something that we often talk about on this show is when we have a professional identity, a professional brand, but perhaps we're not completely speaking to our values and what we're really passionate about. And if you feel you're in that situation, then it can help to reaffirm what those values are. Alison Fragel spoke about the difference between status and power. And power is something that may be given to you, but it doesn't mean you necessarily have the respect of status. Status tends to come when people can see that you are living to your values, you are living authentically, you are practicing what you preach. And to get back in touch with those values and reclaim your status, she talks about trying this particular exercise, and this is the challenge I'm going to throw to you today. I'd like you to think about 3 characteristics that you want your friends to talk about. When they talk about you, what do you want them to say? What 3 things, not what 3 things will they say, not what 3 things will your brand say or your organization say. What 3 things do you want your friends to say about you? When you can recognize those things, focus on bringing those into your everyday life, because that is what speaks to your values at this moment. And then that's an exercise you can do 3 months' time, 6 months' time, a year's time, just to see how your priorities change. a fantastic show it was.
Absolutely amazing. Poppy's so lovely and so interesting to listen to in all the different things that she does.
I don't even know where to start,
No.
as to which bit to take from this, because there is so much. But I think for me, what resonated was that invitation back to yourself.
Yeah, wasn't that lovely? The way that Poppy said that.
Yes, yeah, and even when she's talking about food and how some places, I am thinking UK, I'm afraid, you know, even if food's not, but that is part of heritage, and it definitely inspires me a lot more to go a bit deeper into my own heritage, and almost, I guess, in a way validates that I think I am on the right track in wanting to do it in the first place. But that's what I took. What about you?
Same here. I mean, I also have, I've started to look into my own heritage because my mum comes from a Jewish background. And it's something that I wasn't really aware of until, you know, kind of later on. So it was the ways to start looking into it. And also, like you say, to allow yourself to do that. But also the other thing that struck was really there isn't just one way to deal with mental ill health.
Yes.
You know, the talking and the evidence-based approach isn't always the best way. Just sometimes just being with music or being with Saree, being with art. There are different ways.
Yeah. And that brings me to the point about the opposite of depression is expression.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I've never heard that before,
Yeah.
but it's lovely.
Absolutely beautiful. So, all of you guys, have a healthy week.
A really, really, really easy drape. So this is one that you would often wear with a pair of trousers. So you've got this long, this is a 6-meter silk saree.
Wow.
I think this saree is about 50 years old. It's got a gold border.
Gosh, it's beautiful.
Yeah, and it's got a very classic check. So you'd find the one end. So how you recognise a saree is quite often you'll have a really boring end, which is the end that gets tucked on the inside, and then you'll have a really ornate end, or an end that is sort of a little bit different, and it will have a tassels at the end, like this one I'm wearing has got little tassels. So you know that this is going to be the one that you want to show off and not the starting point usually. So this is the simplest out of all the drapes. So basically you just pleat. And you can see what I'm doing is I'm concertining.
There's a technique there.
There. The pleating is the thing that causes the most laughs in a saree fun shop, because everybody's like, how are you doing that? All you do is you pleat the saree to about halfway, and you might have a pair of jeans on, you might have a pair of leggings on, you might have a skirt on. So my daughter wore this with a mini skirt to a friend's party recently, and it was a net saree. You'd tuck that into your trousers, and you'd continue to wrap the rest of it, and you'd tuck that in, and then you'd have this long bit which you would literally wear as a scarf. And then you'd have, because if you have a pair of trousers on, your leg would be on show this side. If you've got a mini skirt on, your legs would be on show. So you've got a pair of stilettos or a pair of boots, and then you'd have this
Beautiful.
Very simple